They buried their father on a Thursday. By Monday, their uncles were at the door with fake smiles, forged papers, and a moving truck parked outside. At just 19, Elena Carter was too young to legally drink, but old enough to raise 3 younger brothers, old enough to hold their hands at the funeral, and old enough to be told by blood relatives no less that everything their parents built was no longer theirs. No one expected her to fight. No one imagined she'd survive. But what the Carters' uncles didn't know was that buried beneath their lies, under decades of legal dust, was a $100 million trust fund, and a truth that would tear their family's legacy wide open. This isn't just a story about betrayal. It's a story about survival, about justice that doesn't come overnight, but comes all the same. Because when you try to erase the children, sometimes the children grow up to rewrite the ending. The sky over Atlanta was an unforgiving gray that morning. Not quite storming, not quite clear, just heavy. Like the weight pressing down on Elena Carter's chest as she adjusted her brother Caleb's collar at the front pew. The black suit didn't fit him. Nothing fit anymore. Not the suits, not the silence, not the life they were now expected to return to without their father in it. Elena was only 19, but grief had aged her overnight. Her eyes didn't dart around the church like a teenager's should have. They stayed locked on the casket, unmoving. Her jaw was tight, holding back tears she refused to let fall. Not yet. Her 3 brothers, Marcus, Julian, and little Caleb, sat beside her, each reacting to loss in their own way. Marcus, 16, was blank. Julian, 13, clutched a folded photo of their parents with both hands. Caleb, just 8, leaned his head against Elena's shoulder, his lips trembling but silent. The funeral was quiet. Not many showed. Their father, Michael Carter, had kept his circle small. He wasn't flashy. He didn't chase influence. But he worked hard, built a thriving construction business from the ground up, and never once compromised when it came to family. That was who he was. A man of his word. A man whose sudden death had left a vacuum no one was ready to fill. And then there was their stepmother, Rachel, gone just 3 weeks later. A stroke, the doctors said, but everyone knew it was heartbreak. She had loved their father with the kind of devotion people rarely believed anymore. The kind that made her loss feel like a second funeral, even though there was only one casket at the front of the church. After the service, people offered condolences, warm hands, cold words, promises to check in soon. Most of them wouldn't, and Elena didn't expect them to. She just wanted to get the boys home, to sit with them in their quiet house, make them grilled cheese the way their dad used to, and pretend, just for one more day, that the world outside wasn't about to change. But it already had. That evening, as the boys dozed on the living room couch and the last of the sympathy cards sat unopened on the table, the doorbell rang. Elena didn't expect visitors, not anymore. She opened the door to find Uncle Richard and Uncle Charles, her father's older brothers, standing on the porch. Both wore pressed suits and forced sympathy. Richard held a briefcase. Charles held a casserole dish wrapped in foil. Elena, Richard said, his voice slow and patronizing, like she was still a child. "We've come to help." She blinked, unsure what that meant. "With the estate," Charles added. "Your dad's will. The paperwork. You know, adult things." The phrase stung, but she stepped aside, letting them in out of politeness, not warmth. She didn't like them much even before today. They'd always been distant, only showing up for holidays or photo ops. Now they were here with smiles too wide and voices too smooth. They sat her down at the kitchen table. The same table where her father taught her how to balance a checkbook, where he explained compound interest using jelly beans, where Rachel had braided her hair before school dances. The wood still smelled like lemon oil and old laughter. Elena, Richard began opening the briefcase. "We know this is difficult, truly, but we've reviewed the legal documents, and unfortunately, there's no valid will on file." "That's not possible," she replied immediately. Dad had everything organized. He met with a lawyer last year. He said, "We know what he said." Charles interrupted, his tone a little sharper now. "But that lawyer is no longer practicing. And there's no official will in probate court." She stared at them. "What are you saying?" Richard folded his hands. "We're saying this house, the business, the assets, legally, they fall under intestate succession. As next of kin, we're taking control to ensure things are handled properly, especially for the boys' sake. Elena felt the room tilt. This is our home. He left it to us. There's no record of that, Richard said simply. And without a will, the court doesn't recognize your authority. You're 19. Legally, you're not even a guardian. She stood up, her voice shaking. You're not doing this. We already have, Charles replied, pulling a folder from his coat. Effective immediately, you have 72 hours to vacate the premises. A judge approved the transfer this morning. She didn't cry. Not then. Not even when Marcus came downstairs, overhearing just enough to know something was wrong. Not even when Caleb, clutching his stuffed dinosaur, asked why the men in suits were taking his daddy's house. She waited until they were gone, until the boys were in bed. Then she sat at the kitchen table where her entire life had been planned, and began to plan something else. She wasn't sure how yet, or where they would go, but she knew one thing with every ounce of her being. They may have stolen the house, but they weren't going to take her family. 3 days passed like a slow, brutal countdown. Elena packed what she could into hand-me-down suitcases and plastic bins. Toys, clothes, photo albums, their lives shrunk into corners and cardboard. The rest had to be left behind. The leather couch her dad bought after his first big contract, Rachel's favorite coffee mugs, the piano she used to play every Sunday afternoon, gone. By the fourth morning, a moving truck pulled up not to help them, but to take inventory. Elena stood on the porch, arms folded, watching 2 men in coveralls step inside, like the house had always belonged to them. The uncles didn't even bother to show, just sent the crew with a clipboard and court order. She'd called every number she could find, legal aid, her dad's old lawyer, even the county clerk. But it was the same answer every time: no official will on file, no guardianship, no authority. Marcus took it the hardest. At 16, he understood everything, but couldn't fix any of it. He paced the porch like a storm cloud, fists clenched, his voice sharp, any time someone tried to reason with him. Julian stayed silent, too silent. He just kept drawing in the corner of the bedroom, sketching the house over and over, like he was afraid to forget it. And Caleb, sweet Caleb, kept asking if Daddy was coming back to stop it all. Elena didn't have the heart to answer him anymore. That night, they slept in the back of Uncle Leon's old truck, parked behind the church where her father used to volunteer. The pews were locked, but the pastor gave them permission to use the parking lot, so long as they kept it quiet and left by dawn. Elena curled around her brothers under a shared blanket, staring at the stars through the cracked windshield. I don't get it, Marcus finally whispered. He built everything. How did they just take it? Elena didn't respond right away. Her voice was buried somewhere behind the weight of exhaustion. They've had years to prepare, she said eventually. We've had days. What are we supposed to do now? We get through tonight, she said. Then we figure it out. But she already had an idea forming in her mind. A memory she'd buried with everything else. Her father's stories. The ones about his first company back when he was just a kid in Boston. About how he started with nothing but blueprints and grit. About the mysterious account he once mentioned for emergencies, only he'd say with a wink, though she never knew if he was serious. Maybe there was something he left behind. Not in a file cabinet, not in the courthouse, but hidden somewhere only she could find. The next morning, she woke early, brushed the dust from her jeans, and took the boys to the community center. It was a small brick building off Maple Avenue, but the staff knew her. They offered the kids free breakfast and a safe place to rest for the day. While they ate cereal from paper bowls, Elena slipped out and took the bus downtown. She had one stop in mind. The old office space her father used to rent before he moved the company home. Most people had forgotten it existed, but she hadn't. She remembered the chipped red door, the narrow stairwell that smelled like coffee and sawdust, the faded metal plaque, Carter and Sons Restoration. She climbed the stairs with her heart in her throat. The door was locked, but the landlord still lived in the same building upstairs. A few polite words and a $20 bill later, she was inside. Dust blanketed the furniture. Old invoices and business cards still sat in drawers. The place had been untouched for years. She moved slowly, checking every cabinet, every drawer, every panel, until she spotted a loose floorboard behind the desk. Her fingers shook as she pried it open. Inside was a metal lockbox, dented and worn, but still sealed tight. Taped to the lid was a single envelope with her name on it. Elena, if you're reading this, I didn't get to say goodbye, but I made sure you'd be okay. Her hands trembled as she opened it. Inside was a handwritten letter, and the first clue to a trust her father had quietly built in their name. A trust worth more than anyone could imagine. But the uncles had buried it, hidden it, counted on her never being old enough, smart enough, or bold enough to look. They were wrong. She wasn't just going to survive this. She was going to take back everything they stole. And she was going to do it the same way her father built it, all from the ground up. Elena spent the next 2 days buried in research documents and legal language that made her head spin. She borrowed a laptop from the community center using the Wi-Fi to dig into every bank business registry and trust database she could access. The letter her father left behind wasn't just sentimental, it was detailed. It mentioned a silent partner agreement from 2004. It named a firm in Zurich. It hinted at a contingency account filed under a holding company she'd never heard of, Northbridge Orion. But what caught her breath was this line scribbled at the bottom of the second page, Elena, when you're ready. Show this to Mason Granger. He'll know what to do. Mason Granger. The name pulled her memory like a thread. He was her father's old friend, a lawyer, quiet and gray-haired, who used to visit on Sunday mornings and bring donuts. She hadn't seen him since the funeral. Rumor was he'd retired, but she still had his business card tucked in an old photo album. She called his number. Mr. Granger, she asked when a tired voice answered. This is Elena Carter. There was a pause on the line. Then Elena Carter, yes. My father was Benjamin Carter. Another silence, heavier this time. I've been waiting for this call, he said at last. Come by my office tomorrow. Bring the letter. The next morning, Elena, dressed in the cleanest clothes she could find, pulled her curls into a neat bun and kissed her brothers goodbye. Marcus was skeptical. Julian hugged her tightly. Caleb gave her his lucky coin. Just in case, he said. She arrived at Mason's law office, tucked between a florist and a coffee shop in the quiet part of town. Everything about the place smelled of oak and old money. But Mason wasn't cold. He smiled softly when he saw her. I see him in your eyes, he said. They sat. She handed him the letter. He read every word in silence, nodding slowly, as if confirming something he'd long suspected. I tried to fight for you after the funeral, he said. But your uncles locked everything down. The court needed a will. Your father never filed the final version. But he left this, Elena said, motioning to the letter. Doesn't that count? Mason stood and walked to a locked cabinet. He pulled out a leather folder thick with documents and placed it gently on the desk. Your father didn't trust paper trails, he said, but he trusted me. He opened the folder. Inside were notarized signatures, offshore accounts, trust certificates, layers of legal armor Benjamin Carter had quietly built to protect his children, a fallback in case the worst happened. But what shocked Elena most was the balance at the bottom of the trust summary. 100 Autumn 45 Zodun Zlatanlanos. She stared at the number, blinking, not trusting her own eyes. That's not real. It's very real, Mason replied calmly. It's your inheritance, locked away until you turned 21 or filed a rightful claim. I'm only 19, which is why they thought you couldn't access it. But with this letter and my testimony as executor of his private affairs, combined with the power of attorney document your father signed before he died, he slid another piece of paper across the desk. You're not just a beneficiary anymore. You're the legal trustee. Elena's head spun. Just days ago, she was sleeping in a truck behind a church. Now she was the sole trustee of a fortune larger than any she could imagine. But what about the house, she asked. The company, my brother's education, all of it is covered. And as for the house, Mason smiled. You'll want to check the deed records. Your father repurchased it under Northbridge Orion. Your uncles don't even know they were squatters in a house you now own. Elena exhaled slowly, her voice shaking. They threw us out. Then I suggest you walk back in. Mason said not as a victim, but as the woman they never saw coming. She left the office that day with a folder in her arms and fire in her chest. For the first time in weeks, she wasn't afraid. She was ready. It rained the day Elena returned to the house. Not a dramatic storm, but the soft kind of drizzle that quieted everything, like the sky itself was holding its breath. She didn't tell her brother she was going. She wanted this moment alone. She pulled up to the gates in a borrowed sedan, stepped out, and walked right up to the front door in soaked sneakers and a hoodie. Her Uncle Terence opened it. At first, he didn't recognize her. "Elena," he said, eyes narrowing. "You remember me?" She replied, her voice steady. His face twisted. "If you're here to beg, don't. We gave you 3 days of grace. That was more than fair." "I'm not here to beg." "Then what are you here for?" She reached into her coat pocket and handed him a folded envelope. Inside, the original deed to the property signed, notarized, and filed under Northbridge Orion, with her name now listed as controlling trustee. Terrence's fingers shook as he read it. This isn't possible. It's not only possible, it's legal and binding. Behind him, Aunt Lisa appeared wrapped in a silk robe, eyes cold with confusion. "What's going on?" Elena stepped forward. "What's going on is that you've been living in a house that was bought back by my father years ago. He hid it under a company name. You evicted us from a home that didn't even belong to you." Lisa's face drained of color. "You're lying." "No, I'm not." She pulled out the second document. "This is a cease and desist. Effective immediately, you're to vacate the premises within 72 hours. Terrence threw the papers onto the floor. "You think you can come back here with a piece of paper and scare us off, no?" Elena said calmly, "But the attorneys I've retained from Whitaker and Cole can. And the police escort they'll send on Friday can too." She turned to leave, pausing only once. "Don't worry. You'll have time to pack, just like you gave us." As she walked down the steps, the porch lights flickered behind her, Terrence's anger manifesting in slamming doors and shouted curses. But Elena didn't flinch. She wasn't the girl who had sobbed on the staircase just days after burying her father. That girl had been scared. This woman had documents, legal authority, and truth. And when she arrived back at the church lot, her brothers ran to her, confused. "You okay?" Marcus asked, seeing the look on her face. "I'm better than okay," she said. "We're going home." Julian blinked. "What do you mean?" Elena dropped the keys into his hand. "I mean the house is ours. And not just the house." In the glow of the setting sun, she told them everything about the trust fund, the hidden company, the lawyer, and the truth their uncles had tried to bury. When she finished, Caleb looked up with wide eyes. "So, we're rich," Elena laughed for the first time in weeks. "We're safe. That's what matters." But she knew even then, safety was just the beginning. What came next was restoration and justice. They moved back into the house the following Monday. There were no police sirens, no headlines, just a quiet morning where a black SUV pulled up the circular driveway, and 3 siblings stepped out. Elena in a blazer borrowed from the church's community closet, her brothers in pressed shirts and nerves. The door was unlocked. The house felt colder than she remembered, more hollow. But the floors still creaked in the same places, and the air still carried traces of the cinnamon candles their mother used to burn in the fall. For a long time, the 3 of them just stood in the foyer, unsure what to do, until Elena stepped forward and laid her palm flat on the wooden stair rail. "We're not guests," she said. "We don't need permission to be home." It took all morning to clean up the mess Lisa and Terrence left behind. Broken dishes, torn curtains, a wall scuffed with boot marks, as if someone had kicked it out of spite. But the bones of the house were still strong. Marcus opened the garage and found their father's old toolbox, untouched, perfectly organized, like it had been waiting for him. Julian found a half-finished jigsaw puzzle in the living room closet that brought back memories of snow days and hot chocolate. And Caleb, wide-eyed, as always, wandered the upstairs hallway and whispered, "It still smells like Mom." That night they made dinner together. Nothing fancy, just spaghetti and garlic bread the way they used to. They ate at the long dining table, every place set, even the ones for their parents. For the first time in months, the silence between them wasn't heavy. It was peaceful. But Elena knew peace alone wasn't enough. Their uncles hadn't just tried to steal their home. They had stolen dignity, stability, and nearly their future. She sat at her father's desk and reopened the thick binder Mason had given her. page after page of hidden assets, shares in companies she didn't recognize, investments her father had made in community organizations and educational programs. But one line stood out, highlighted in blue: the Carter Foundation dormant. Her father had started the paperwork for a nonprofit before he died. A foundation meant to serve young people like her and her brothers, brilliant, overlooked, and underestimated. It had never been launched. The name had sat in limbo for years. Elena made a decision right then. This inheritance wasn't just for survival. It was meant for something bigger. The next morning, she sat down with Mason again. She told him about her vision scholarships, mentorship programs, safe housing for kids who lost parents too young, a network of protection and possibility. Mason listened carefully, then nodded. "It's ambitious," he said. "I know. But you're your father's daughter. He would be proud." And so Elena Carter, 19 years old and newly legal trustee of over $100 million, began drafting the next chapter, not just for her family, but for every kid like them who'd ever been told they didn't belong. The Carter Foundation would not just be a name on paper. It would be the legacy that outlived grief, and the answer to every door that had ever been slammed in her face. 2 months later, the Carter Foundation officially launched. The press conference was held at the Northbridge Civic Center, but the real spotlight wasn't on the stage. It was on Elena, standing behind the podium in a crisp navy suit, flanked by her brothers and surrounded by the very community that had held them up when they had nothing. The same people who had donated food, lent sleeping bags, and passed around collection plates now watched as the girl they once sheltered was about to give back tenfold. "Good morning," she began, her voice steady. "2 months ago, my brothers and I were nearly homeless. We lost our parents. We lost our home. But what we never lost was hope." The room fell silent. "I stand here today, not as someone who inherited wealth, but as someone who inherited a purpose. My father believed in building something that would outlive him. He believed that no child should be punished for circumstances beyond their control." She paused, eyes finding Marcus, Julian, and Caleb seated front row. "And now, neither do I." Applause rose warm and genuine. The Carter Foundation was more than a charity. It was structured like a social trust, offering micro-grants to foster teens aging out of the system, emergency legal assistance for kids facing guardianship abuse, and scholarships for high school students whose only crime was being poor and brilliant. Within the first week, the foundation funded uniforms for an entire inner-city school. Within a month, it had placed 12 displaced teens into safe housing. And within a year, it would be nationally recognized. But back at the Carter house, things remained wonderfully ordinary. Caleb was back to building things out of cereal boxes and duct tape. Julian had joined the school's chess team and was cleaning up at local tournaments. Marcus, who never used to speak in public, had started mentoring middle schoolers in poetry and debate. As for Elena, she spent most evenings back in her father's study, now converted into a dual office, drafting strategic plans, answering grant requests, and drinking too much tea. One night, Mason stopped by with a thick white envelope. "You might want to sit down for this," he said. Inside was a certified letter from a Boston law firm, one that had once represented her uncles. Elena raised an eyebrow. "What is this?" Mason leaned back, watching her carefully. "It's a formal apology and a settlement offer." Her heart skipped. "They're trying to buy their way out. They're offering $10 million to avoid a lawsuit." Elena stared at the papers, then slowly folded them closed. "They don't get to walk away with a check," she said. "They tried to erase us, and the only payment I want is their silence." Mason smiled. "I thought you'd say that." And so the settlement was declined. The lawsuit proceeded, and when the judge ruled in their favor, the case became a precedent used in courts across the state for young people defrauded by extended family. Elena didn't just take back what was hers. She changed the rules for everyone who came after. By the time fall settled in, the Carter Foundation had already reached places Elena never expected. Local news stations ran features. Teachers wrote in from counties she'd never even visited. One principal from a rural town in Maine broke down in tears during a Zoom call, explaining how 3 of his brightest students had finally applied to college because of a Carter grant. But Elena didn't need headlines. Her success didn't come with flashing lights. It came on nights like this when she sat on the front porch with Marcus, Julian, and Caleb wrapped in fleece blankets sipping cocoa and watching the sky shift from dusk to starlight. "You think Dad would be proud of us?" Caleb asked, his voice small. Elena didn't answer right away. She looked out toward the horizon, the old oak trees silhouetted against the moonlight. "I think he already was," she said, "even before we did any of this." Julian smiled. "Then we just keep proving him right." Inside the house no longer echoed with loss. It buzzed with purpose. Kids came by after school for tutoring sessions. Elena started a Sunday reading circle. Marcus was helping one of the neighbors apply for a small business grant. It didn't take long for the neighborhood to stop calling them those poor Carter kids. They had become something else entirely. One morning, Elena received a certified package addressed in unfamiliar handwriting. Inside was a handwritten letter. It read, "Miss Carter, I watched your press conference with great interest. Your poise, your vision, it reminded me of someone I used to know. I worked with your father in the early days of his firm. He spoke of you often, fiercely. I never had children of my own, but I believe in planting seeds where others see only broken ground. Enclosed, please find the deed to my cabin property in Litchfield County, Connecticut. It's yours now. Use it as a retreat, a refuge, or whatever your soul needs when the noise becomes too loud. With respect, Walter Abramson." Elena's eyes welled with quiet disbelief. A complete stranger, moved not by her inheritance, but by how she used it. The cabin became a sanctuary, a place where she and her brothers escaped on weekends. No cell service, no meetings, just the crackle of a fireplace and the sound of their own laughter. But peace, as she'd learned, often came in waves, because just as they were settling into a rhythm, the past tried one last time to claw its way back. It came in the form of an invitation, elegant cream paper, gold embossing, the kind reserved for fundraisers where the wine costs more than most people's rent. Elena recognized the logo before she even opened it, the Easton Harrington Foundation, one of the most exclusive philanthropic circles in New England, a world her uncles had once fought to keep her far from. She almost threw it away, but curiosity more than pride made her read it. "Upon Dwarm, in recognition of the Carter Foundation's impact, we humbly request your presence at our annual Legacy Gala. Keynote speakers will include State Senator Grace Lemaire, Chancellor Robert Dunn, and if you're willing, Miss Elena Carter, we believe your story is not just extraordinary, it's essential." Mason leaned in when she showed it to him. "You don't have to go." "I know," she said, "but I think I want to." When the night of the gala arrived, the ballroom gleamed with crystal chandeliers and carefully curated smiles. Elena walked in, not as a guest of anyone, but as a name that carried weight. The whispers started before she even reached the check-in table. "Is that the Carter girl? She's younger than I expected." Didn't her family have a scandal? She didn't flinch. She was used to being underestimated. What she wasn't used to was seeing her uncles near the donor wall. Decked in tailored suits, glasses in hand, they mingled among CEOs and old money families like nothing had ever happened. Like they hadn't once left her and her brothers with nothing but a shoebox of documents and an eviction notice. They didn't see her at first, but she made sure they did when she took the stage. The room hushed the moment her voice rang out. "I grew up learning that family meant loyalty. That legacy meant stewardship. That wealth without compassion is just a prettier kind of poverty." She paused. "I used to think our story ended with loss, with betrayal, with people we loved choosing their bank accounts over our well-being. But I was wrong." Elena's eyes scanned the crowd, lingering briefly on the two men who once called themselves her guardians. "Our story doesn't end with what they did. It begins with what we survived and what we built anyway." Applause erupted. Not polite, not performative. Real, thunderous. Later by the drinks table, her Uncle Martin approached. His voice was low. "You've made quite the name for yourself." Elena didn't smile. "You helped." He blinked, unsure how to interpret that. "If you hadn't thrown us out," she continued, "I wouldn't have known how strong I was, or how deeply people root for the underdog." He cleared his throat. "We were just trying to protect the estate." "No," she said. You were trying to protect yourselves. Martin nodded slowly. I suppose that's fair. Don't worry, Elena added, lifting her glass. I'm not here to make a scene. You've already made your legacy. And now, I'm making mine. Back home, things felt different. Not because of the gala or the headlines or even the whispered apologies from people who had once looked down on them, but because for the first time, Elena didn't feel like she was carrying the weight alone. She wasn't just a survivor anymore. She was a builder, a leader, a sister whose love had built something permanent, stronger than the walls they once lost. That winter, the Carter Foundation launched its most ambitious project yet, the Phoenix Program, a fund to provide emergency legal aid, transitional housing, and college mentorship for orphaned and displaced teens. Applications flooded in, stories too familiar. Kids who, like her and her brothers, had been forgotten by the systems meant to protect them. And then one day a letter arrived, a thin white envelope with an address from Vermont. Inside, a short, handwritten note. Dear Elena, I don't know if you remember me. I was one of the interns at your parents' firm. They gave me my first job. Your dad once paid my rent in secret so I wouldn't have to drop out of law school. I never forgot. I just passed the bar exam. My first client will be through the Phoenix Program. I thought you'd want to know. The kindness they planted is still growing. Tobias M. Elena sat on the porch that evening, the letter clutched in her hands, snowflakes softening the edges of the world around her. Julian joined her with mugs of hot cider. Marcus came with headphones on, pulling one off to smile at her. Caleb sat cross-legged on the step, sketching the old house. And for the first time since she lost her parents, she felt still, safe. The house was no longer just a house. It was alive. It breathed with stories, with healing, with hope. And in the quiet of that moment, she heard her father's voice again, not in memory, but in legacy. You build not because it's easy. You build because someone has to stand when others fall. Elena wasn't standing alone anymore. She never had been. The courtroom was smaller than the headlines made it seem. But the moment Elena stepped inside, the air thickened. Not with fear, with reckoning. The lawsuit had dragged on for over a year. Filed by Elena on behalf of the Carter estate against Martin and Harold Carter, her uncles, for fraud, misrepresentation, and emotional damages for wrongful eviction. They had tried to settle quietly behind closed doors with sealed documents and apologetic lawyers. But Elena said no. This wasn't about money. This was about truth. And when the judge called the court to order, she sat calmly, hands folded in her lap, while her uncles fidgeted behind their attorneys. They didn't look like men in charge anymore. They looked like what they'd become, people trying to rewrite the past after the ink had already dried. The evidence was clear. The trust documents had been tampered with. A clause buried in fine print confirmed that the Carter children were the sole beneficiaries of a $100 million trust established by their father and triggered upon his death. Her uncles had known, and they'd lied. When the verdict came in, Elena didn't blink. In favor of the plaintiffs. Full control of the Carter estate was restored. The judge added punitive damages, substantial ones. But even before the gavel fell, Elena had already won. That night, the siblings sat together in their restored home. The same staircase where they once cried as boxes were packed now echoed with laughter. The same rooms once emptied now held life again. Music, paintings, plans. Marcus had been accepted to the Royal Conservatory in London. Julian was leading a youth mentorship program downtown. Caleb's art had been featured in a regional gallery show. And Elena, she had become the face of something bigger than herself. Not an heiress, not a headline, a symbol that in a world quick to discard the young and underestimated some names, rise again stronger, louder, and unshakable. As she looked around at the family dinner table now set for celebration, not survival, she thought of all the times they had been counted out, and of how they never gave in. Because the truth was, some legacies aren't passed down. Some are rebuilt from ashes. And Elena Carter, she had built hers with gray steel and a fierce kind of love that not even betrayal could touch. And if this story moved you, if you believe in second chances, in quiet courage and injustice that takes its time, but never forgets, then we'd love to have you with us. Subscribe to the channel for more true-to-life stories where strength rises from struggle and dignity always finds its way home. Until next time, stay brave, stay kind, and never underestimate the quiet ones.